I'm currently working on legislation to ensure that the state hospitals, and particularly the director, take more personal and active role in the placement process. Can you tell us if anything you've done since the audit to take a more active role in the review process for potential placement sites prior to a lease being signed?
Yeah. So the department actually takes a very active role in placement locations. So Liberty Healthcare we do contract with Liberty Healthcare to do the placement process and to provide the treatment monitoring and supervision, but the department is actively involved in the operation of the program and works very closely, as I mentioned before, with Liberty in all of the operations of the program, including placement locations. With respect to when a site assessment is performed, so let's say that we are ordered to place an individual into a county, and there is statutory placement requirements that are laid out in statute. So Liberty does the searching for the housing, and they have to follow the statute. And they look not just in specific communities, they look county-wide. They are required to place in a domicile county, and they look county-wide. They look through often thousands of properties to identify potential placement locations. They prepare a site analysis and a forensic analysis of that of a potential location, and then those are then presented to the department for its review and approval before it's presented to the court.
I think I'm sorry to interrupt, but a lot of the processes I think most of us are familiar with. I think what I'm kind of driving to since the audit and coming to this oversight hearing, what is you personally as the director, and then maybe more broadly as the department, we're expecting more oversight and accountability from Department of State Hospitals over the actions of Liberty Healthcare and the steps they're taking in finding these placements. So specifically, what we want to know is, are the potential placement sites, are you looking at those before the leases are being signed? Because that's it was brought up in the audit, how much money is being spent on that. And what has the department done to increase the outreach in these communities that these sites are being considered? So I guess two things here is, what's the review process for potential placement sites from the department, and what are you doing to reach out to the communities to have the communities have a stronger input into these siting potentials? Thank you.
I was getting to that portion of the placement review process, which so once the Liberty completes their site analysis, it goes through a three-stage review at the department. It goes through 3 levels of review. The first level is by the program. We have a team of consulting psychologists that provide the oversight over the program, and they do the first level review. If they have any feedback back to Liberty, then Liberty will take and address that feedback and look at it could be anything from, we have further questions about the property, about the documentation. It can run the gamut. Once they respond to the consulting psychologist's feedback, then it comes in for program leadership and then the legal office review. And then same thing, they can find additional questions, they may have additional comments, and then that goes back to Liberty for them to address, and then it ultimately finally comes into the director's office and our chief counsel for review. And we do the final review, and we often have many questions as well before we approve a project to be submitted to the court. But currently, you don't personally sign off on that placement. I'm trying to find out between the review and the actual taking responsibility for the placement. There's a discrepancy there. So before our team will approve Liberty to move it forward to take it to the housing committee meeting first, and then to the court, it has to be approved by the director's office before our internal policies are that the director's office has to sign off before they submit it to the housing committee for its consideration and to the court. Okay. We heard from the auditor that the Department of State Hospitals is currently spending about $2,800 a month on contract to Liberty to find the placements.
In addition to that expense, there's also expense for when Liberty signs a lease and then is deemed unsuitable by a judge or for other reasons. What's being done by state hospitals to hold those costs accountable? And, especially, basically, I think the perception is Liberty has a blank check here to go spend as much time as they need to spend to find these placements. And then once the placement the lease is signed, there's still no accountability on that lease payment that could be $4,000 to $6,000 or more $1,000 a month. So what's being done by state hospitals to hold Liberty accountable on those issues?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's important to note that there's kind of like two parts to this process. There's a housing hold, and then there's the formal lease when the house is approved. So initially, we will, the Liberty Healthcare, often with the approval from the court, will put a housing hold on the property and enter into an agreement with the owner in order to start that evaluation process, so that the owner cannot rent the property until we've done our vetting and basically we have a hold on that property so that we can go through in our process with Liberty to go through all of the vetting in order to go through all of the process that happens, right? We have the process is really laid out in statute, and we have to follow that entire process, which is going through the evaluations, the site assessments. We have to go to the housing committee. We have to go to the court. There's a 30-day notification period once we've noticed the court that we have to do with the community. Oftentimes there are things that happen with the court that will, generate continuances. So that home can be on hold for a period of time while we are working to do through the entire statutory process. And then once the court is approved, then the lease gets executed, and then then we have 30 days to move the individual into the community if the court approves the housing.
So do you have some thoughts on, is there a way to increase the accountability on those expenses, or are you comfortable with the way it's being handled now?
Yeah, we are, like I said, we're heavily involved in working very closely with Liberty throughout this process. So they aren't off on their own doing it without oversight. We are actively engaged as they move through step by step through the process.
Okay, I'll segue over to, I've got I had some questions about transient release and all of that, but I know that that's not relevant really to the conversation today in the audit. For Liberty Healthcare, as has been stated, the audit shows that there's, about a 36% of conditionally released SVPs either reoffend or return to state hospitals, a 36% failure rate of costs that keep rising. Why should taxpayers trust Liberty Healthcare to administer this program in a way that protects public safety and responsibly utilizes taxpayer money?
Thank you, Senator. The conditional release program model, actually California pioneered its current version of it in the 80s, and it's really been a star amongst the whole country in terms of its outcomes and approach. Of course, later, an adaptation of an SVP CONREP came into play, but the same principles are involved. It's been extensively studied, actually, by the old Department of Mental Health as they implemented this model. And in fact, they did find if you conditionally release someone, you have more failures to terms and conditions of release than you do actual reoffenses. And so up until this point, that's been viewed as a positive of conditional release program. In other words, those two things aren't lumped into one category of failure. In fact, we prefer having a failure because someone failed a term and condition rather than progressed on past that failure to a point of reoffense. So if you do have a conditional release program, you will have more failures due to terms and conditions. That's a trade, however, to less actual crimes being committed. So up until this point, that's been viewed as a positive. And in fact, the outcome that you get from a conditional release program, that's why you implement a conditional release program, so that you catch earlier in the process of declining and you re-institutionalize that person who is now on track toward a reoffense. So that's what I guess I would suggest, that you may be getting a gain from that.
Well, I think, one of the arguments that that we're trying to get to here is that this program is safe, and I'm trying to argue that it's not. Liberty Healthcare, you placed Douglas Badger, a serial predator, next to a family with children, 2 of them deaf, and I'm just wondering, how can we consider that safe? How is that a responsible placement?
Well, I'm sorry, I can't speak exactly to that exact placement process. I would return to the processes that we have in place for determining where this housing is. This is obviously a very upsetting process, right? To take someone entitled, a sexually violent predator, and return them to the community. And there are passions and emotions and that have to be gone through. So we've implemented a process of determining where that would be. By the way, we do this because we're asked to search for this, for these housing, just because someone has to look for it. So we have designated, people that go out and search for it. By the way, to let you know, we provide treatment, we provide supervision. Those we use on our supervision end of things. We hire people with probation experience, parole experience, law enforcement experience, because that's the expertise you need in kind of considering these locations. So I just point back to the process.
I'm pointing that one just specifically because I'm sure Assemblymember DeMaio and I would agree that Borrego Springs is not is a particularly safe place to release sexually violent predators for the same reasons that Senator Valladares mentioned her area. As has been stated on the dais, and we're hearing from our constituents, that Liberty Healthcare is lying to our constituents, they're lying to the homeowners, they're lying to the communities, they're misleading to secure these placements. Why are we tolerating this? And what are you doing to correct it or prevent it from happening anymore?
So I'm very concerned about allegations against Liberty Healthcare. I want to hear about them. I want to know any allegation against this program that there's been a misdeed. We will look at that. We will uncover that. If we make mistakes, we will be accountable for that. So I welcome hearing about things that we need to look into, and Liberty Healthcare will be transparent and participate in all searches. So what we bring, we will be transparent in what our processes are in terms of this.
Well, I want to bring up one specific example. SVP Gary Snavely, you told the homeowner it was either a witness protection or a violent criminal, and that he was in his 70s when he was actually 61. You also offered $6,000 a month when the market rate was $4,000 a month. This seems like deliberate deception.
In finding a landlord, we go out, we search for available housing. We have an entire process of informing that landlord that, listen, we're looking for a house. This person has committed some offenses. Okay, I'm okay with that. This person's committed some sex offenses. Okay. This person is a sexually violent predator. Sexually violent predator places can become very litigious, a lot of community opposition. We introduce that to the landlords. They understand that before moving forward. We often, in fact, maybe always pay over market rate because it's the only reason that landlords are willing to do this. And sometimes the opposition is more overwhelming than they thought it was. And that opposition can come from family members. It can come against any other business interests that they have. It can come from all sorts of levels that they just did not anticipate was going to happen. So we do inform the landlords, but they sometimes don't feel informed because later on it's far beyond what they even thought it would be.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I'll wrap up. I've got some more questions, but the bottom line is, and has been shared here, this program needs some major overhauls, and that's why I'm carrying legislation to address 2 points of the audit. I think things that we can fix, and so far have bipartisan support on, and I'll continue working on these issues until my last day here in the legislature. Thank you.